Ezekiel Holt spotted the wooden cross from half a mile away. It stood stark against the endless Montana sky, a crude aberration on the eastern boundary of his land where nothing but sagebrush and buffalo grass belonged. The afternoon sun cast its shadow long across the parched earth. Something hung from it that wasn't right, something that moved. He'd been riding fence line since dawn, fingers raw from mending barbed wire, mind dull with the familiar ache of solitude. Now his blood quickened as he dug his heels into the flanks of his bay gelding. "Easy, Samson," he muttered as they closed the distance. The horse snorted, sensing his unease. 50 yards away, Ezekiel saw it was a woman. Ezekiel dismounted with a grunt, his knees protesting the impact. 53 years had worn his body thin and hard as jerky. He approached cautiously, hand resting on the Remington holstered at his hip. She hung limply, bound to the cross by rough hemp rope at wrists and ankles, her head slumped forward so that her matted brown hair obscured her face. Her dress, once blue, now gray with dust, fluttered weakly in the hot wind. Around her neck, a wooden placard dangled from a length of twine. "Ma'am," his voice came out rough, unused to anything but talking to livestock, and the occasional whispered prayer over his wife's grave. He drew closer, scanning the horizon for any sign of who might have done this. Nothing but emptiness in all directions. His nearest neighbor, Caldwell, lived 12 miles west. The rail stop at Bitter Creek lay 20 miles east. The woman didn't move. Dust devils swirled around the base of the cross, which had been driven deep into the earth at the precise point where his property met public land. Whoever had left her here had known exactly what they were doing. The wooden sign around her neck had been scorched with the words, "Come back when you're perfect." "Jesus Christ," he whispered. At the sound of his voice, the woman stirred. Her head lifted just enough for him to see her face. Young, no more than 20. Her right eye was swollen shut, her lip split. Dried blood had traced a path from her temple to her jaw. But her left eye fixed on him with startling clarity, deep brown and filled with an emotion he couldn't name. Not fear. Something harder. He cut the ropes at her ankles first, supporting her weight as her legs buckled. Then he reached up to free her wrists. As she collapsed against him, he caught the scent of sweat, blood, and something else, coal oil, maybe. The cross itself reeked of it. "I'm going to cut you down," he said, reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. "Don't be afraid." A sound escaped her, something between a laugh and a sob. Whoever had done this had planned to return to burn her alive. "Can you speak?" he asked, easing her to the ground. "What's your name?" She stared back, silent. Her uninjured eye tracked his movements as he removed his canteen from Samson's saddle. When he held it to her cracked lips, she drank greedily, water spilling down her chin and neck. She nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. He helped her onto Samson, then mounted behind her. She was all bones beneath the thin fabric of her dress, but she sat rigid, refusing to lean back against his chest, even as she swayed with exhaustion. "I'm Ezekiel Holt. This is my land." He gestured vaguely westward toward the low silhouette of his cabin. "Can you ride?" "Let them," she whispered, her voice like stone grinding against stone. "Whoever did this to you," he said, "they might come back." She turned her face slightly, and he caught the profile of her undamaged side. A straight nose, high cheekbone, strong jaw. Not pretty in the conventional sense, but striking. Her good eye narrowed at the horizon. As they rode away, Ezekiel glanced back at the cross. The cabin looked smaller than usual as they approached, squatting against the vast landscape like something ashamed. Ezekiel had built it with James Holt, his father, 27 years ago when they'd claimed this stretch of Montana territory. Back then, it had seemed a palace compared to the cramped tenement they'd left behind in Chicago. Now it was a monument to loss. His father, dead of pneumonia the third winter. His wife, Martha, 5 years in the ground. His son, William, gone east to Boston after the funeral, sending increasingly infrequent letters that Ezekiel kept in a tobacco tin beside his bed. "It's not much," he told the woman as he helped her down from Samson, "but it's dry." She stood unsteadily, taking in the weathered logs, the small corral, the vegetable garden enclosed by a listing fence. Her gaze lingered on the smaller cabin 30 yards away, Martha's flower garden now overgrown with weeds, before returning to him. Still, she said nothing. She remained in the doorway, her body tense as if ready to bolt. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs occupied the center. In the corner, his narrow bed with its patchwork quilt. The floor was packed earth covered with braided rugs Martha had made during those endless winter nights. "You can have the bed," he said. "I'll sleep in the barn with the horses." He busied himself stoking the stove, setting a kettle to boil. From a trunk beneath the window, he withdrew one of Martha's old nightgowns. "I won't hurt you," he added, aware of how little that might mean coming from a stranger. "You're safe here." Something flickered across her face, disbelief, perhaps, or maybe just the shadow of whatever had happened to her before he found her. "You can change behind the screen," he said, indicating the wooden partition in the corner that Martha had insisted upon for modesty. "I'll make something to eat." Behind the screen, he heard the rustle of fabric, a sharp intake of breath that might have been pain. When she emerged, Martha's nightgown hung from her frame like a sheet on a scarecrow. Her bare feet were filthy, her ankles raw from the ropes. He set about preparing a simple meal: beans, salt pork, cornbread left from breakfast. The familiar routine steadied his hands, which had begun to tremble. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken so many words in one day. She sat at the table where he indicated, watching as he ladled food onto a chipped plate. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if each required calculation. "You should see Doc Matthews in Bitter Creek," he said, as she ate with slow, methodical bites. "For your injuries." She shook her head. "Abigail." "Then, at least tell me your name. I need to know what to call you." She set down her spoon, considering him. The bruising around her eye had deepened to purple, spreading down her cheek. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and even. "Abigail," he repeated. "Do you have family looking for you? What about whoever did this to you? They'll come looking." A bitter smile twisted her damaged lip. "No." Her hand tightened around the spoon. "Yes." "Who are they?" She looked away toward the window where darkness had fallen. "Men who believe in perfection." Ezekiel felt a chill despite the warmth of the stove. The sign around her neck. "Come back when you're perfect." Abigail pushed her half-eaten food away. "It means I should be dead, Mr. Holt." "What does that mean?" He raised an eyebrow. "You know your scripture." "Ezekiel," he corrected, automatically. "Ezekiel," she repeated, testing the name. "Like the prophet who saw wheels within wheels and the valley of dry bones." "I know many things." She touched her swollen face gingerly. "None of them saved me from this." She nodded, crossing to the bed where she lay down fully clothed. Her back to him. Ezekiel gathered the dishes, watching her from the corner of his eye. Despite her injuries, there was something unnervingly self-possessed about her. Most women he'd known, admittedly few, would have been hysterical after such an ordeal. "Get some rest," he said, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. But who even knew he existed anymore? He'd become a ghost long before he was dead, haunting the edges of his own life. Someone had left her there specifically for him to find. Outside, he crossed to the barn. Inhaling the familiar scent of hay and horse, he tended to Samson, then spread his bedroll in an empty stall. Sleep seemed impossible. His mind kept returning to the woman in his bed, to the cross on the boundary of his land. In the darkness, he fumbled for his tobacco pouch. rolled a cigarette with trembling fingers. The match flared, illuminating the rough walls of the barn. For an instant he thought he saw a figure standing in the shadows. Martha, her face reproachful. "You've let everything go to ruin," she seemed to say. "Even yourself." The match burned down to his fingers. He cursed, sucking the singed flesh. When he looked again, there was nothing but darkness. He bolted upright, disoriented before remembering the woman Abigail in his cabin. He grabbed his rifle and ran barefoot across the yard. The door stood ajar. Inside, Abigail knelt amid the shards of what had been Martha's china teacup, the last unbroken piece of the set they'd received as a wedding gift. In the gray pre-dawn, Ezekiel woke to the sound of breaking glass. "I'm sorry," she said without looking up. "My hands." She shook her head, carefully gathering the fragments. In the dim light filtering through the windows, her bruises appeared almost black against her pale skin. He set the rifle aside. "Never mind that. Are you hurt?" But it wasn't just a cup. It was one more piece of Martha gone. One more failure to preserve what little remained of the life they'd built. Abigail watched his face. She must have been beautiful. "Leave it," he said, taking the pieces from her hands. "It's just a cup." "Who?" "Your wife." She nodded toward the daguerreotype on the mantel. Martha at 23, her hair swept up, her smile tentative, as if uncertain she deserved to be captured for posterity. "Yes," he said, setting the broken pieces on the table. "She was." Ezekiel turned away, busying himself with the stove. "What happened to her? And your son?" "The small cabin outside. A boy's wooden soldiers on the shelf, the letter on your desk addressed to William Holt, ESQ. He stiffened. "What makes you think I have a son?" He hadn't realized she'd noticed so much. "He's in Boston, studying law." Ezekiel grunted non-committally. Pride wasn't what he felt when he thought of William. Loss, perhaps. Abandonment. The boy had left the day after they'd buried Martha, climbing onto the eastbound train without a backward glance. "You must be proud." "What about you?" he asked, changing the subject. "Where are you from?" Abigail rose, folding her arms across her chest. The nightgown slipped from one shoulder, revealing a latticework of scars that disappeared beneath the fabric. Old injuries, long healed. "Most recently, Bitterroot Valley," she said. "Before that, many places. And the men who did this to you?" Her expression shuddered. "They call themselves the Shepherds of the Righteous Path, a religious community. They take in women they believe need salvation." "And what did you need saving from?" A dark look crossed her face. "Independence." Ezekiel had heard of such groups. Zealots who broke off from established churches to form their own communities in the wilderness. The frontier attracted all kinds seeking freedom from the constraints of civilization, for better or worse. "Their leader is a man named Jeremiah Blackwood," she continued. "He believes women should be vessels of purity. When they fall short," she trailed off, her hand rising unconsciously to her damaged face. "How did you end up with them?" "I was traveling west from Chicago. My stagecoach was attacked by bandits near Bitterroot. The shepherds found me, took me in. At first, they seemed kind." Her mouth twisted. "Kindness is an effective lure." "Punishment," she said simply. "For imperfection. And the cross, the sign, it means I disagreed with Reverend Blackwood, publicly, and I helped one of his wives escape." Ezekiel frowned. "What does that mean?" "His wives, plural?" "He has 7. Had 7. A ghost of satisfaction flickered across her face. "Rebecca is gone now. To Oregon, I hope." The implications settled over Ezekiel like a shroud. A religious cult. "Multiple wives. Brutal punishment for disobedience." "These men," he said carefully, "they'll come looking for you." "Yes." She met his gaze steadily. They'll burn your ranch to the ground if they find me here. And yet, he should take her to Bitter Creek, he thought. Let Sheriff Davies handle this. It wasn't his problem. He'd spent 5 years cultivating his isolation, perfecting the art of being forgotten. Something like surprise crossed her face. Why would you risk yourself for a stranger? They won't find you, he heard himself say. Not if we're careful. Because I couldn't save Martha. Because I've been dying by inches since she left. Because I'm tired of being a ghost. Because it's the right thing to do, he said, instead. She studied him, skepticism evident in her unswollen eye. There's no such thing as a selfless act, Mr. Holt. Ezekiel, he corrected again. And maybe not, but there are degrees of selfishness. The smile faded. No, none of us were. I wasn't always alone, he said, more sharply than he intended. A half smile lifted the undamaged corner of her mouth. Pragmatic theology. I didn't expect that from a man who lives alone on the edge of nowhere. 3 days passed in uneasy coexistence. Abigail's bruises faded from purple to sickly yellow-green. The swelling around her eye subsided enough that she could open it partially. She moved about the cabin with increasing steadiness, though she still favored her left side where she'd finally admitted she had suffered cracked ribs. Ezekiel kept to his routine, tending livestock, mending fences, checking the condition of his sparse crops. But now he found himself hurrying through chores, oddly eager to return to the cabin where Abigail might be waiting. On the 4th morning, he woke before dawn and rode to the eastern boundary where he'd found her. The cross still stood, but someone had been there. Fresh horse tracks circled the area. A scrap of paper had been nailed to the wood. "We know she's with you." Ezekiel tore it down, crumpling it in his fist. His heart hammered against his ribs as he scanned the horizon. Nothing but emptiness in all directions. Yet he felt watched, exposed. He returned to find Abigail in Martha's garden, on her knees among the weeds, digging with bare hands. She looked up, squinting against the sun. She'd tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, revealing the clean lines of her face. The bruises were still visible, but beneath them, he could see she was handsome in a severe way. "What are you doing?" he demanded, dismounting. "Salvaging what can be saved," she said, indicating the plot. "There are perennials here, iris, peony, columbine. They're still alive beneath the weeds." Something constricted in his chest. "Leave it," he said roughly. "It's not worth the effort." She sat back on her heels, studying him. "Because she's gone. Then why stay?" The question caught him off guard. Why indeed? What kept him tethered to this harsh place that had taken everything he loved? "Because there's no point," he snapped. "Nothing grows here for long. This land takes more than it gives." "It's mine," he said finally. "It's all I have left." Abigail wiped soil from her hands. "They were here, weren't they? The shepherds." He hesitated, then nodded, producing the crumpled note. She read it, her expression hardening. "And go where?" "West, California maybe, or north to Canada." "I should leave," she said, "tonight." "Then what do you suggest?" There was an edge to her voice. "Wait here until they come with torches." "They will, you know. They burn what they can't purify." "Alone? With no money? No horse?" He shook his head. "They'd catch you before you crossed the county line." Ezekiel thought of the coal oil scent on the cross. "We'll go to Sheriff Davies in Bitter Creek. Tell him what happened." "Then we'll fight," he said, the words surprising him as much as her. "If they come," she laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "The law doesn't interfere with religious communities, Mr. Holt. Not out here. And Blackwood has connections, judges, politicians, men who visit the compound for services." The implication hung in the air between them. Ezekiel felt sick. "I told you." "Why?" she demanded. "Why risk yourself?" "No," she interrupted. The real reason. He looked past her to the overgrown garden, to the small cabin where William had grown from boy to man, to the patch of earth beneath the cottonwood where Martha lay. "Because I'm tired," he said finally. "Tired of watching things die." Something softened in her face. "That's a dangerous kind of tired, Ezekiel." She regarded his calloused palm for a long moment before placing her soil-stained hand in his. Her fingers were strong, her grip firm. "Maybe." He extended a hand to help her up. "But it's honest." "Honesty," she murmured. "Another luxury I've done without." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "Yes, they will." He pulled her to her feet, suddenly aware of how close they stood. She came barely to his shoulder, but there was nothing fragile about her. She was like the land itself, resilient, unyielding, shaped by harsh elements into something that endured. "We should prepare," he said, stepping back. "If they're watching the property, they'll make a move soon." A shadow crossed her face. "My father was a gunsmith in Chicago, before the fire." That night, they sat at the table cleaning his weapons by lamplight. The Remington, the rifle, an old shotgun that had belonged to his father. Abigail handled the guns with practiced ease, her movements economical and precise. "Where did you learn to handle firearms?" he asked. She nodded. "We lost everything." He never recovered. Drank himself to death within a year. "I'm sorry." "The Great Fire? In 71? And after?" "I made my way. Worked as a teacher for a while. Then, as a nurse, during the typhoid outbreak in 76, her hands stilled. I've seen a lot of death, Ezekiel. I don't fear it anymore." She shrugged, continuing to clean the shotgun. "It was a long time ago. It's not death I fear," he said quietly. "It's what comes before." She looked up, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Failure," he corrected. "Watching something precious slip away while you stand helpless." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Your wife, you couldn't save her." 3 days, he said, the words torn from somewhere deep. 3 days I watched her burn with fever, begging for water I couldn't give her because it made her worse, praying to a God who wasn't listening. "And your son?" Something in her tone made him look up sharply. "You have children?" Abigail set the shotgun aside. "Children rarely understand what they leave behind." "Left the day after we buried her. Said there was nothing for him here." Ezekiel's throat tightened. He was right. "What happened?" Pain flashed across her face, so raw he almost looked away. "Had," she corrected softly, "a daughter, Emma." "Blackwood happened." Her voice was flat. "She wasn't perfect enough for him." "He killed a child?" Ezekiel's voice shook with rage. 4. Abigail's hands clenched on the table. She had a crooked spine. A deformity from birth. Blackwood said it was evidence of sin. My sin, that she couldn't be part of his perfect community. The implications hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. "Jesus," he whispered. "How old was she? And left you for me to find." Ezekiel frowned. "But why me? I've had no dealings with these people." "Not directly." He denied her medicine when she took ill. Said faith should be enough to cure her if she was worthy. Abigail's eyes were dry, her voice steady. "I tried to leave with her. They caught us at the boundary. Made me watch as she died. Then they bound me to that cross as punishment." Something flickered in Abigail's expression, hesitation perhaps. "I don't know," she said, looking away. "Perhaps they thought a God-fearing man would finish what they started, or return me to them for proper punishment." Abigail nodded, gathering the cleaned weapons. "Ezekiel," she said, as he turned to leave. "Thank you for believing me." "We should get some rest," he said, rising from the table. "Take shifts watching. They'll likely come at night." It wasn't the whole truth. Ezekiel sensed it, but didn't press. Everyone had secrets they guarded. pieces of themselves too raw to expose. Outside, he settled on the porch with the rifle across his knees, watching the moonlit landscape. The night was clear, stars scattered like salt across the black dome of sky. In the distance, a coyote called, its cry lonely and haunting. He paused in the doorway. "I know what it's like to lose everything, Abigail. No one chooses that." He thought of Martha, of the life they'd planned together. Children who never came. Dreams that withered like corn in drought. And now this strange woman with her terrible past, thrust into his life by forces he didn't understand. Was it mere chance that had brought Abigail to his land, or something else? Some grand design beyond his comprehension? Ezekiel didn't believe in coincidence, but he wasn't sure he believed in God's plan anymore either. Not after Martha. Not after watching hope die by inches. Yet, here he was, preparing to fight for a stranger, to protect a life not his own. Perhaps that was its own kind of faith. They came at dawn, when the world was still wrapped in gray mist. "They're here," he said, grabbing the shotgun from beside the door. Ezekiel spotted them from the barn loft, where he'd gone to check on a nest of barn owls, 6 riders emerging from the tree line to the northeast. They moved, with purpose, rifles glinting dully in the half-light. He scrambled down the ladder, running to the cabin where Abigail stood at the stove, her back to the door. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. Martha's apron, he realized with a jolt. In the dim light, with her hair pulled back and her bruises faded, she looked almost at home. "Minutes. We need to—" "How long?" "I know where to go." She removed the apron, reaching for the Remington on the table. "Alder root cellar. Under the trap door beneath the rug." He blinked, surprised. "How did you—" "I've explored every inch of this place," she said, matter-of-factly. "Old habits. Always know your escape routes." There was no time to dwell on what else she might have discovered during her explorations. They moved quickly. Pulling back the braided rug to reveal the trap door Martha had insisted upon when they built the cabin. A place to store preserves, she'd said. A shelter during storms. The hinges creaked in protest as he lifted the heavy door. A narrow ladder descended into darkness that smelled of earth and decay. Ezekiel hadn't opened it since her death. She hesitated, 1 foot on the ladder. "You can't face 6 armed men alone." "I'm not planning to die today," he said grimly. "Just buy some time. We can pick them off from the root cellar if they breach the cabin." "Go," he urged Abigail. "I'll hold them off." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Be careful." "Always am." She disappeared into the darkness. Ezekiel replaced the trap door, covering it with the rug, before positioning himself at the window that faced east. The riders had reached the edge of his property, moving slowly through the tall grass. Their leader rode slightly ahead, a tall man in a black coat, his beard reaching to his chest. Jeremiah Blackwood, Ezekiel presumed. The others flanked him, spread out in a loose formation that suggested military training. Ezekiel considered his options. He could try to reason with them, but Abigail's words echoed in his mind. They burn what they can't purify. These weren't men who could be deterred by words. He raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at Blackwood. At this distance, it would be a difficult shot, and killing the leader might only enrage the others. Better to wait, to let them show their intentions. The riders halted 100 yards from the cabin. Blackwood raised a hand, and one of his men produced a white cloth, waving it in the air. Ezekiel hesitated, then stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed. "A parley, or a trap." "We come in peace, Mr. Holt," he called, his voice carrying clearly across the open ground. "We seek only what is ours." "That's far enough," he called. "State your business." Blackwood urged his horse forward a few paces. He was younger than Ezekiel had expected, perhaps 40, with sharp features and eyes that blazed with fervor even at this distance. "I harbor no one," Ezekiel lied. And if I did, it would be my right on my own land. Blackwood smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. You harbor a sinner, Mr. Holt, a woman who has betrayed sacred vows and corrupted the innocent. There's nothing of yours here, Ezekiel replied evenly. There's no one here by that name, Ezekiel insisted. Now I suggest you turn around and leave my property before I consider this trespassing. God's law supersedes man's law, Blackwood said, his voice hardening. The woman Abigail has committed crimes against the divine order. She must be returned to face judgment. Blackwood's smile faded. We know she came to you, Holt, just as we knew she would. A chill crept up Ezekiel's spine. What are you talking about? Ezekiel's mind reeled. William, his son, had written to these fanatics. The letter, Blackwood said. The one your son wrote to us 6 months ago, about his widowed father, alone on the frontier, a godly man in need of salvation. He reached into his coat, producing a folded paper. William was most eloquent in his concern for your spiritual welfare. You're lying, he said, but doubt had already taken root. Rage surged through Ezekiel, hot and clarifying. Get off my land, he said, raising the rifle. Am I? Blackwood's smile returned. Why do you think we left her there, at the edge of your property? It was an invitation, Holt, a chance for you to prove your righteousness, to return the sinner for proper judgment. He gestured expansively. You could have been one of us, part of something greater than this emptiness you call a life. Blackwood's expression hardened. You choose sin, then. So be it. He turned to his men. Cleanse this place. Let nothing remain. The others dismounted, taking cover behind the water trough and the woodpile, methodical, trained. These weren't ordinary zealots. The riders spread out, rifles coming up. Ezekiel ducked back into the cabin as the first shots splintered the doorframe. He dropped to the floor, crawling to the window where he fired twice in rapid succession. One of the riders fell, clutching his shoulder. The trapdoor lifted slightly. Pass me the Remington, Abigail said, her voice calm. A bullet shattered the window above him, showering him with glass. Ezekiel rolled away, positioning himself by the trapdoor. Abigail, he called, pulling back the rug. They know you're here, Blackwood says. He broke off as another bullet thudded into the wall beside him. You knew? Betrayal lanced through him. He handed down the pistol, then the shotgun. Blackwood says William wrote to them about me. In the dimness of the cellar, he couldn't see her expression. I know, she said after a moment. Before he could respond, something crashed against the cabin wall. The distinctive sound of breaking glass followed by a whoosh of flame. Fire arrows, perhaps, or bottles of coal oil. They're burning us out, he said grimly. We need to move, now. I saw the letter, she admitted. At the compound, your name, this place. She hesitated. I'm sorry, Ezekiel. I should have told you. Ezekiel stared at her, wondering if the strain had affected her mind. What are you talking about? There's no tunnel. He descended the ladder into the root cellar, a low-ceilinged space with earthen walls braced by timbers. A small window at ground level provided dim light and a view of the yard behind the cabin. Abigail crouched beneath it, the Remington ready. There's a tunnel, she said, gesturing to the far wall where a dark opening gaped. It leads to the creek bed. Martha showed me in a dream. Look for yourself. This wasn't here before, he said, bewildered. Martha never. He moved past her, peering into the darkness. Sure enough, a narrow passage had been dug into the earth, shored up with wooden planks. It couldn't have been more than 3 feet high, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. Above them he could hear the crackle of flames. Smoke began to seep through the floorboards. A bullet pinged off the metal frame of the window. Abigail fired back, the report deafening in the confined space. Got one, she said with grim satisfaction. "We need to go, Ezekiel. The cabin won't last long." "How did you know about this tunnel?" he demanded. "That's impossible. It would take weeks." She met his gaze steadily. "Because I dug it 3 nights ago while you slept." Ezekiel's head spun. She was right. Martha had insisted on the escape tunnel after a neighboring homestead was attacked, but he'd sealed it after her death, unable to bear the reminder of her foresight. "It was already here," she interrupted. "Just collapsed. I cleared it. Martha used it during the Blackfoot raids, didn't she? Before the treaties." "How could you know that?" he whispered. Another volley of shots peppered the cabin. Smoke thickened, making it difficult to breathe. Abigail's expression softened. "She told me, Ezekiel. In dreams." She touched his arm gently. "She's not gone, not entirely." "We have to go," Abigail urged. "Now." Above them, a beam crashed as the fire took hold of the cabin's structure. Ezekiel hesitated, looking around the root cellar at the dusty jars of preserves Martha had put up the summer before she died, at the cobweb-draped shelves he'd built with his own hands, at the last remnants of the life he'd tried to create. "Ezekiel," Abigail said softly. "Let it go." "The sec." She nodded, handing him the shotgun before crawling into the narrow passage. "You first," he said, gesturing to the tunnel. "I'll follow." The tunnel was longer than Ezekiel remembered, twisting beneath the earth like the path of a wounded snake. Dirt showered down with each distant explosion above. Blackwood's men had found ammunition or kerosene in the barn. The sounds of destruction grew fainter as they crawled toward the creek bed. Ezekiel's lungs burned, his knees raw against the packed earth. Ahead, Abigail moved with surprising speed, as if she'd traversed this passage many times before. Perhaps in another life, he thought wildly. Perhaps in dreams. Finally, the tunnel angled upward. Abigail paused, pressing a finger to her lips before cautiously pushing aside the covering of branches and earth that concealed the exit. Daylight streamed in, momentarily blinding. Ezekiel followed, emerging into the dry creek bed that marked the western boundary of his property. From here, they could see smoke billowing from what had been his home for nearly 3 decades. The barn was fully engulfed, the cabin a smoldering skeleton. Blackwood's men moved among the ruins like shadows. "Clear," she whispered, pulling herself out. "We need to keep moving," Abigail urged, tugging at his arm. "They'll check the creek bed soon." But Ezekiel couldn't tear his eyes from the destruction. Everything gone. Every trace of Martha, of William's childhood, of the life he'd built, reduced to ash and memory. "Ezekiel," Abigail said gently, "it's just things." He turned to her, this woman who had lost far more than he ever had, who had buried a child, who carried scars visible and invisible. "West," she said simply, "or north, somewhere they won't follow." And then, what? "Where will we go?" he asked, suddenly aware of how old he felt. She considered him, her eyes clear and direct in the morning light. The bruises had faded to faint shadows, revealing the strong lines of her face. "Then we live," she said, imperfectly. From the ruins of the ranch came shouts. They discovered the root cellar, perhaps the tunnel. It wouldn't be long before they began searching the creek bed. "We should go," Ezekiel said, finding his resolve. "Coldwell has horses, 12 miles west." He almost laughed. 5 years ago he would have considered the question an insult. Now he recognized it as simple practicality. Abigail nodded. "Can you make it?" "Yes," he said. "I can make it." They set off along the creek bed, staying low where the banks provided cover. Behind them, more shouts, the tunnel discovered. They had perhaps an hour's head start at most. "The sign around your neck," Ezekiel said as they walked. What was it really about?